Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to be closing out our coverage on the Fledging Shell Thunder external Thunderbolt 3 SSD. As a refresher, and there'll be a link to the unboxing where we opened it up and took a look inside. This is a bus-powered Thunderbolt 3 external SSD that contains a Thunderbolt to M.2 bridge. And is actively cooled, which is actually the first time we've looked at an actively cooled Thunderbolt drive. Now, inside this appears to be the M13 non-turbo SSD that Fledging sells for installation in discrete systems. So this is actually a fun review, and we'll have a follow-up later where we have benchmarks of this drive in a proper desktop. Actually, probably our new test bench, which you'll see more about in hopefully another week or two after this is live. But let's go ahead and bring this up. So as a reminder, we run Thunderbolt 3 devices on our ThinkPad P50. Not that our Z590M test bench isn't capable of Thunderbolt 3. I just don't have the add-in card for it. And after shelling out the money for the rest of the test bench, the add-in card's not in the budget this week. So we're going to keep using what we've used for USB-C and Thunderbolt devices before. I'm going to go ahead and start recording. I rebooted and the numbers are ballpark where I expected them to be. 2632 by 1922 on sequential is honestly not that far from where the drive is rated in the first place. A 1 terabyte MP34 was rated for 3000 meg per second reads and 2600 meg per second writes. We're about 400 shy on the reads and 600 on the writes. I mean, it's on an external interface. It's in this little enclosure. I bet if I look at Crystal Disk Info, it's actually heating up this time. 33 degrees Celsius, which is funny because the metal shell itself feels warmer than 33 degrees. So that tells me that that little cooling fan is actually moving the heat away from the SSD. So there's our Crystal Disk Mark 6 result. And we'll save this as save that. We're in Crystal Disk Mark 7. So we have our full complement of comparison data. So that actually, this puts me in an interesting place. Now, I said it looked like the drive was built the way I expected their non-turbo M13 to be built. I mean, side by side, I had a hard time picking out which one was the turbo and which one wasn't. However, I know now by model number that this drive is a Team MP34 that's been sold as an OEM drive. Which one of those should I call it when I run it on the bench as an internal drive? Clearly, Team is an OEM that Fledging is using. And if you purchase a M13, it may be built by Team, but also there may be some firmware changes or something else that happens when it's being sold as an actual drive as opposed to just a device in an enclosure where I know for a fact this one at least says it's an MP34. Let me know in the comments below what you think, how you feel about that, and we'll take it under advisement when we approach that. So this is actually an interesting situation here. I'm actually looking at an external drive that's faster than some of the internals we've benched. If I want to look back to the Kingston A2000 that we reviewed in December, that pulled a 2274 sequential read and a 2190 sequential write at a Q depth of 32 and a 4K random of 418 read and 248.8 write, which this is well above and beyond. Now, that was an older version of Crystal Disk Mark. We hadn't moved all of our testing to 6 and 7 yet, which is part of why I'm running both 6 and 7 here. That was back on Crystal Disk Mark 5. So the numbers aren't 100% apples to apples. But it's very interesting to see. Actually, let's go ahead and bring up Crystal Disk Mark 6 because I think that used more comparable numbers. It's very interesting, at least sequentially, to see an external device outperform an internal one. The random I/O is actually, at least on the older test, in favor of the internal device. So I'm going to have to pay a little bit more attention to that as I get to tests that we haven't replaced. All right, next up, we're going to use Atto. Atto is a great benchmark from the standpoint of drive manufacturers because it gives them room to pick what number they want to use. And what I mean by that is Atto goes and it runs through different transfer sizes. And we start at 512 byte. I think we go up to... I can't move it. Forget if it was 64 or 256. I'll see in a second. No, it's definitely 256 for the transfer size. And on most drives, this generates a ramp where it picks up speed as it approaches either 64 or 128K transfers for its size, and that is the size of the data that is requested to be read or written to the drive in one chunk. Looking at these, we did actually, and this is the first time I've seen this, see a increase in read speeds all the way to the 64 meg size, and actually the drive cooled off. It's only 29 Celsius now. We did see a little bit of regression in the write speeds when we were in the 1 to 2 meg size, but then it too actually continued to increase all the way to that 64 meg transfer size. So we peaked at 1.87 gigs per second write and 2.66 gigs per second read. And that's kind of first, and I think part of it actually is the enclosure. And what I mean by that is this drive is obviously underperforming what it's capable of if it was directly attached to a motherboard's interface. Even though Thunderbolt is PCIe 3 Gen 4, there's bridge chips and there's just additional overhead that's not there on a normal PCIe interface. So because of that, I think the drive has a little more room to breathe thermally than it would if we had it on the bench. Because what we see, and what I anticipate seeing when I take this out and put it on a motherboard, is that the drive will ramp up to a certain speed and then have to cut back because it has reached a temperature where it can't quite run at 100%. All right. Next up is our big data collector for the all-in-one tests. This is Anvil. which I would love an updated version of Anvil, but I don't think it's ever going to happen. This runs a lot of predetermined tests, sequential 4 meg, 4K, random at a couple of Q depths. It also does 128K transfers. What I like about Anvil is the things that it is built on are things that we're capable of using outside of it. So Anvil uses the same methods and tests that IO meter does. So if I wanted to use IO meter as a spot check to make sure Anvil was working right, and I have before, I just need to set my test up the same way and run it. Now, IO meter has got a lot more bells and whistles than Anvil exposes. It also doesn't have a pretty GUI, which is why I use this and we get screenshots of this. We don't typically get screenshots of IO meter. We are going to, run our record in OBS, but that's separate. So it looks like most of the read tests are done at this point. No real surprises. Anvil typically underperforms compared to some of the other tests because it does have certain limits that the other tests don't, where the sequential 4 meg read is only intended to read 2 gigabytes worth of data. Depending on how quickly the drive responds to that, it may not actually be a sufficient volume of data for it to reach its maximum performance. We see that on our write tests as well. 1 gig, 640 meg, 640 meg, 640 meg are the sizes that it just caps out at. All right. So we're going to save those. Bring up ASSD. This is always an interesting one because you can watch the results that it's pulling in as it's doing them, and you can see them fluctuate up and down during the duration of the test. Well, that's not good. Could not open drive physical drive 3. Okay. Let's just rerun that one more time. 33. I've had some fighting with ASSD before on that access time test, and I think that was also on an NVMe drive. It's interesting. Could not open drive physical drive 3. Okay, what if we... I think it already did, but let's run it as the administrator. And let's test access times on our team drive. What about... Okay, so I think there's a bug in ASSD, at least this build of it. I'm going to try and get an updated build for for the access time. Let's go ahead and run the copy benchmark portion out of it anyway. And I'm going to take screenshots of these. As far as I'm concerned, these are the numbers that were generated during our testing. And unless they're dramatically different, I'm just going to have to put a big asterisk next to that for a did not finish. But this is not the drive's fault. I just watched it fail on one of our Kingston NVMe drives that I've reviewed and had no issues with in the past. So this is a issue with this software. Performance-wise, I do like that this gives me a number of IOPS. These are a good sanity check against other tools like Anvil and like IOmeter that are going to generate results in IOPS. Alright, so what that leaves us with is I need to double check the syntax on this, and I'm going to make a 900 gig test file as f iobw.tst. Alright, so what that did is it generated a 900 gigabyte file, which is actually, 943 because of file system overhead and discrepancies between 1024 and 1000 megabytes per gigabyte. Basically, I've left 52.2 gigs of free space on the drive, which is more than I want. So let's go ahead and try that again, and we're going to go for 950. I find that some of those discrepancies in how things get labeled can cause issues with this particular piece of software, since it thinks it made a 950 gig file, but it's actually got a size on disk that's different. I wonder why that's reporting 998 million kilobytes, but this is actually reporting 1 billion bytes. Anyway, 1024 to 1000 is hard. So what we've done is we've left basically no free space on the volume at this point, and I'm not going to whittle that down to figure out how I can get that last 218 megabytes. What I am going to do is I'm going to bring up IOmeter, and this is our standard consistency test. We run a full random QDEP 32 4K write. So we run this for 3 hours and 15 minutes, but we actually look at the first 2 hours from when it starts reporting results till 7,600 seconds in. And the reason we do that is that we see and we learn a couple of things about the drive. And actually, we'll learn interesting things about this. So one of the things that IOmeter is going to show us, and we've got this set up, we have 32 IOs per target. We've got one target, that's our drive. It is full random. We are writing 4K data 100% of the time, and we're going to learn a few things. We're going to see some thermal performance. We're going to potentially learn how large the SLC cache is on the drive. Now, that's a variable, especially on a lot of drives. Some of them change that as they're full, and since this is on an external interface, it may be able to clear data out of that SLC cache and make it look bigger than it is for a period of time, since I'm not actually saturating its full write capability. It's got a little more room to flush things out. We're also going to get some performance consistency numbers. Now, that's a metric that we calculate based on the last 5 minutes of the test. And the way that works, we calculate the average, we calculate the standard deviation, and the ratio between the two gives us a number that the higher the ratio, the more consistent the performance. Theoretically, there should be no deviation from the average. The reality is, there always is. Drives that have tighter consistency give us a better result there, perform more, have more anticipatable performance under heavy load scenarios. Do I expect the Shell Thunder to necessarily be my favorite drive for that? By default, not typically. I don't usually expect external drives to do fantastic in this test. However, having dedicated cooling may give it a leg up on any other NVMe drive that we've tested externally. Well, yeah, maybe give it a leg up on any other NVMe drive we've tested. Also, as far as external NVMEs are considered, I do anticipate it will outperform any USB-C devices, and it's already posted results that are above and beyond various Thunderbolt enclosures we've looked at. So this is uncharted territory for me. However, I'm not going to stand here while this is running. I'm actually going to cut the main camera, and we'll just have OBS that'll be fast forwarded through when it's done, because this takes several hours. Alright, so our I/O meter results finished running last night. I have those, and I've taken the time to turn them from a jumbled mess of text into this chart. And this chart is what we run I/O meter to generate, and it's actually kind of surprising. So what we see is the Shell Thunder mostly managed between 30,000 and 35,000 IOPS. That's it. That's where it was. That's not how we normally see a drive behave. And I thought maybe this might lead to actual better performance for this particular test. Keep in mind, what this test is looking for is the difference between the minimum and what this test is looking for is the ratio between the average and the standard deviation for the last 5 minutes. So, and you can see some of the drives in our chart perform miserably in that. Like the 240 gig Excelsior E2, that's probably my best example of just a bad drive consistency-wise. The E2 did everything it was designed to, but the fact that it used 2 SATA SSDs with kind of not great controllers and okay PCIe to SATA bridge chip, well, resulted in kind of terrible performance consistency-wise. But it still outperformed standard SATA SSDs, which is what it set out to do, and it wasn't a bad drive for video editing and that type of thing. It just didn't earn any sort of recommendation for server use. Anyway, we can see that a lot of the newer drives that we've gotten in the bench tend to do better, and PCIe devices tend to do fairly well, just due to higher performance floors, tightening things up. And the last few that we had through were the KC2000 and the SA2000, which both performed better, and that actually surprised me. And the reason that surprised me because of what their charts looked like. This is the chart for the KC2000, which is kind of what I'm used to seeing out of a Silicon Motion PCIe NVMe drive, where it starts off very high, and we see what happens as the SLC cache and the DRAM fills, and then about halfway through we enter this bistable mode where there's 2 groupings, one above and one below, that it's bouncing between. So we get an average in the middle of that, and it doesn't lead to terrible standard deviation. It still weighs in at a 7. But it's not as great as it could be. The Shell Thunder, 32,807 for our average, 2,800, 383 for the minimum. Standard deviation of 5083 brings us to a 6.45 consistency score. That is way above what I anticipated, and actually higher than the last few externals we tested. Now, part of that is like the last external PCIe device that we ran this through that I have in my chart was an Intel 660p in an Arico enclosure. The Arico enclosure was a $30 enclosure, not a $130 enclosure. B, it was a QLC device, a first generation QLC device at that. And QLC does not have great steady state performance compared to TLC or an MLC drive, especially when you factor in not only are those more performant NAND, but they tend to be, what's the word I want to use here? They're more performant NAND and their controllers are more mature. They're more of a known quantity. They're not something that just showed up. Which QLC is more mature today than when I used the 660p for that demo. Alright, where does that leave us? We have a relatively performant external drive, but it's nothing special since it's just an enclosure with an external SSD. Let's look at the pricing. So the Shell Thunder, without getting to pick what SSD is in it, at 1 terabyte costs $293 on Amazon. And if I go to the Fledging website, I'll have a little more info there. So $293, the enclosure is $145 on its own. Okay. The enclosure is cheaper direct from Arica or from Fledging. Probably have to pay for shipping, so there's give and take on Amazon. But we do get a choice between a Phison E12S, a WD Black SN750, and a Team Group MP34 drive. And some of these, this is the MP34 model. It's out of stock below 4 terabytes, which I don't even think the MP34 has a 4 terabyte that I've seen reviewed. Maybe that's a new model. The SN750 is $323.99. The Phison E12.6 is $264. That's probably going to be the slowest of the three. So it's not way out in left field price-wise. It's priced as a premium enclosure. What ends up being kind of a pain point for me is I know what an SN750 costs. I can go to Amazon and say, I want a 1 terabyte SN750. And it's going to cost me $146. 146 plus 130 brings me to, we'll say, $280. So it's a $40 fee for them to put the drive in the enclosure. And they're probably making more than that since A, I know there's markup on the enclosure. B, if they're buying these drives in any form of bulk, they're getting them at a discount. So they're probably making $75 just for putting it in there. Now, whether or not that $75 is worth it is up to you. And what I think that really comes down to is, yeah, I don't actually want to register a product. I just want the warranty details on it. I think it comes with a 1 or a 2-year warranty off the top of my head. A little light on the, oh yeah, 1-year warranty. So, for that $75, if you buy it with, or, for that, we'll say $323, because I don't have a price on the MP34 version, or, we can say $293, because I just don't know what drives in this one. So we'll say for that $300, you get the SSD, you get the enclosure, and you get a 1-year warranty. For that 1 year, both the enclosure and the drive are covered by Fledging. I almost want to encourage you to buy your own drive and put it in the enclosure, simply because if we use the SN 750 as an example, that's going to ship with a 5-year warranty from WD that is going to be above and beyond what Fledging will do, at least on the SSD side. And that's not to say they might not help you if the drive fails. 2 years in, file a warranty claim with the vendor that provided the drive. But WD is also well within their rights to turn to you and say, no, that was sold as a complete system, you have to go to the vendor. Just like happens if you get a drive in a desktop or a laptop. Doesn't matter if it says Seagate, WD, Toshiba. Those drives are covered by the laptop manufacturer, desktop manufacturer, not the vendor that provided the drive. Because part of their negotiations in reaching a bulk price are, well, we're only going to provide you with X warranty support on the drives, or we're not going to provide you with any warranty on the drives, you just have to buy extras, but we'll cut 10% off the price because you're buying 1 million drives. So, anyway, it puts it in a weird place price-wise. And probably the best comparison that I have is the OWC Envoy Express, which underperforms relative to the Fledging. And, well, isn't even listed. And is about $80 for half the performance. If you were looking at it and saying, for $80, I need that 1533 read that the Express can provide, you might be the same type of person that looks at this and goes, I'm going to spend the extra $50 and get an enclosure that's almost twice as fast. The people who are buying this enclosure are different than the people who are buying that Arico enclosure that I've looked at. You're spending another $100. What are you getting? Well, a nice aluminum shell, active cooling. It's Thunderbolt instead of USB-C. And it's overall just a order of magnitude faster. Is that worth it? Well, yes, no, maybe. Depends on who you are. Depends on what you do. If you are literally just looking for bulk external storage, no, it's not worth it. You're probably the kind of person that would be happy picking up like an 8 terabyte Western Digital MyBook or Seagate external and just using it as big dumb storage. If you're the kind of person who is working with multiple people, editing videos off this drive, using it as part of a production process in a video editing environment, scientific data, that type of thing. Well, yeah, actually, time is money in those environments, and although $50 looks like a lot on the initial price of the enclosure, well, how much time does it save you every day? How much faster are your exports if you're editing directly off the drive? How much quicker can you move media around system to system? That starts to be part of the return on investment calculation on an external drive. And for a lot of those people, a drive like this isn't actually a bad investment. And those are the same people who would actually typically buy it drives included because of the works out of the box factor. They're going to buy it because it works out of the box and not take time to purchase their own drive and install that and risk doing something wrong. That is not worth saving the $30, the $50, and the extra warranty time frame. Honestly, the warranty time frame is not as big as a factor as it sounded like for the amount of time I took to explain it. I've had 2 SSDs fail in the past few years, and I was well past the warranty terms on them and just destroyed them with far more data than they were ever intended to handle as a right. All right, so that's our benchmarks. That's our kind of closing thoughts on the Shell Thunder. It's not a bad drive, but it needs the right customer. There will be an article with more comparison charts and that stacks it up against some of our other drives. Overall, honestly, it's probably the fastest external we've tested so far. That doesn't mean that we're actually going to continue using it as an external drive simply due to the nature of Thunderbolt. Most of the instances where I use an external SSD today require compatibility with USB. Now, there are dual interface Thunderbolt devices available, and I would love to get my hands on one of those because that would work as a Thunderbolt device here and a USB device at my desktop or at the office when I have laptops that still don't have Type-C ports, or even the mini PCs that we review that need augmentable storage sometimes. All right, so closing out, I'd like to thank Fledging for sending in the Shell Thunder for a review. This has been a fun little drive to work with. I do love the aluminum enclosure. I like metal enclosures. The active fan, it did what it promised. I'm not 100% sure that it was worth the engineering time when they could have just used a more rigid enclosure, but I'm not upset about it either. It was relatively quiet. I had a hard time hearing it over the fans in my laptop. I want to thank, as always, Electrix for providing our opening and closing themes. I would like to thank anyone who helps support Pocketables either by Patreon or using our Amazon affiliate links. It is support like that that makes videos like this possible. And finally, thank you for watching.